everyone, it's Miss Ashtiani here. I'm back for another writing lesson. Before we get started with our writing lesson, I would like to say a huge well done to all of you who've been working super hard at home with all of your home learning. I'm going to share some of your lovely writing you've been doing at home.
Well done Lily in 1A, who's thought of some super describing words for her flower she's drawn. Well done Elliot in 1A, who's written a super sentence. He's also remembered to use write a line, miss a line. Well done Georgia in 1C for writing some super sentences. Well done Kaysen in 1C, who's remembered to use finger spaces. Well done Pippa in 1D, who's used the conjunction because in her sentence. Well done Bonnie in 1D, who's tried her best to keep her letters on the line when writing sentences. Well done Bria in 1J, who's tried really hard with her capital letters.
Don't worry if you didn't see your work because I'm filming this a week before you will see it. So if your work hasn't been shown in my video, it will be shown in one of the other videos.
Our learning objective for today's writing lesson is to become very familiar with key stories, fairy stories and traditional tales, retelling them and considering their particular characteristics. What's the big picture? Well, Little Red Riding Hood wants us to learn her story. Let's read the story and then we can share it with other children in our school.
Let's have a look at our key vocabulary for today's lesson. Join in with me, we're going to use our storytelling actions. Our term. Once upon a time, early one morning, suddenly, luckily. Right then, today we are going to carry on retelling the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Let's have a look back at Monday's lesson. We're going to recap the story from Monday. It's our turn, so make sure you join in with me retelling the story. Once upon a time, there was a girl called Little Red Riding Hood who lived in a forest. Early one morning, she went to see her grandma. She had a basket full of food. First, she went into the forest. Next, she went down the path. After that, she went up the hill. Finally, she got to Grandma's house. Knock, knock, knock. She went into the house and went upstairs. Grandma did not look right. She had big eyes. She had big ears. She had big teeth. It was not Grandma. It was the wolf. Suddenly, the wolf jumped out of bed and ran after Little Red Riding Hood. Luckily, a woodcutter ran in and shouted at the wolf. The wolf ran off into the forest. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandma lived happily ever after.
To help us with retelling the story of Little Red Riding Hood, we're going to start sequencing the different parts of the story. To do this, we're going to think about the sequence skill in our Viper's reading strategies. When we are sequencing, we use time adverbials like first, next, after that, and finally. I am going to sequence the story of Little Red Riding Hood using a story map. I have drawn 6 different boxes for my story map. It's my turn. So, I'm going to think of the first part of the story. Once upon a time, there was a girl called Little Red Riding Hood who lived in a forest. Now, the next part of the story. Early one morning, Little Red Riding Hood went to see her grandma. She had a basket full of food. So I've got a picture of a basket in the second box. What comes next? She goes to Grandma's house. So I'm going to find the picture of her going into Grandma's house. And that's my third picture. We're only going to work on those first 3 pictures in the story to start with today and retell those 3 parts of the story.
Right then, I have drawn the first 3 parts of the story on my story map. I have got Little Red Riding Hood, who lived in the forest in the first box. Next, I've drawn a basket for when she goes to Grandma's house with a basket full of food. And in the third picture, I've drawn a picture of her getting to Grandma's house. We are now going to use my story map to start retelling those parts of the story. Our turn. We're going to use our storytelling actions to help us. It's an our turn. Ready? Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Little Red Riding Hood who lived in a forest. Early one morning, she went to see her grandma. She had a basket full of food. First, she went into the forest. Next, she went down the path. After that, she went up the hill. Finally, she got to Grandma's house. Your turn. I would like you to start creating your own story map for the story of Little Red Riding Hood that we have been retelling. You just need to draw the first 3 parts of the story like I did during our lesson. Use the pictures on your story map to retell those first parts of the story.
Chili 1 is to recall the main events of the story. Chili 2 is to sequence the story in the correct order and verbally retell the story using storytelling language. Chili 3 is independently sequence the story and add time adverbials and key words onto the story map for detail. Here are the parts of the story which you need to draw a story map for. The key words which you'll need to include for Chili 3 are in red.